here I am in Athens, Greece. It was 2017, and I had just finished my freshman year of high school. Just 2 months prior to this trip, I was approached by two of my good friends to join them in an academic competition, the World Scholars Cup, that would take place in Greece. I immediately said yes, thinking about all the time I would spend on the beach, the great amounts of seafood I would eat, and just how popping my Instagram feed would be. What I didn't think about, however, was the terribly thorough 6-subject curriculum that I would have to slave over for 2 months in order to do well in the competition. That's just one subject. As interesting as the topics were, I spent hours taking notes, and even more hours trying to memorize the notes that I took. No amount of cue cards or hand cramps seemed to help me memorize the plethora of information. By the time the competition came around, I had only managed to memorize a measly 2 of the 6 subjects. I competed alongside my teammates in debate, writing, and 2 multiple choice events, individual and group. The individual multiple choice, or better known as the Scholars Challenge, is a 120-question Scantron-based test covering all 6 subjects. Daunting, I know. To make things worse, the challenge had a 70-minute time limit. For anyone wondering, I did horribly. To many people, it may seem like an impossible feat to memorize that much information, but it's not. Of course, over a very long period of time, anyone can manage to memorize that much information. However, if someone were given my time limits, just 2 months or even less, most people would not be able to complete the task with normal rote learning techniques. So how can someone memorize so much information in such little time? The answer lies in a mnemonic called the memory palace, or the method of loci. Said to be invented in 500 BC, the method of loci was said to be invented by Simonides, an ancient Greek poet. In essence, the memory palace allows people to memorize large quantities of information with great accuracy for long periods of time. The idea is simple. We take a familiar location, a childhood home, a mall, or a street, and we use it to store information using elaborative encoding. The mnemonic requires us to create these intense multi-sensory images related to the information that we want to store, creating a long-lasting visual for us to retrieve later on. By tying these visuals to familiar locations, we are able to essentially codify all of the information in our brain. Let's try it out. Feel free to keep your eyes open, but I invite you all to close your eyes. Imagine that you are standing in front of your home, facing your front door. Notice the color of the door, the objects around you, the texture of the ground below you. Now, imagine that John Travolta is standing right next to you, and he's dressed as his iconic character, Danny Zuko. He's wearing a thick black leather jacket, and his jeans are just a tad bit too tight, accentuating awkward places and inhibiting him from walking normally. He's just smoked a cigarette, and you can smell the stench of the smoke coming right off of him. He nods his head at you and opens your door, allowing you to step into your home. Behind your door is Po from Kung Fu Panda, and he's wearing a toga. Po stands at about 8 feet tall, towering over you, and he holds a scroll, which he unravels, and you can hear the parchment swish against itself as it falls to the ground, seemingly forever, until it's piled high up to your neck, brushing against your arms and your legs, every inch of the scroll covered in writing. Leaving Po, you enter your living room, and parked in your living room is the magic school bus in all of its bright yellow glory. The sound of the running engine fills your ears as the smell of gasoline fills your nose. Sitting in the driver's seat Justin Trudeau. Behind him, Hitler and Einstein. Maybe not the best bus buddies. You can hear the rumble of the engine as you leave your living room to head towards your kitchen. And once in your kitchen, you see Billy Joel adding wood to a fire in your sink. Of course, he's singing, "We Didn't Start the Fire." Creating images such as these create a sort of augmented reality within our minds, an interesting and memorable way to store information. So, in a situation similar to the one that I was put into 2.5 years ago, the memory palace technique should be the go-to technique to consolidate all of the information. But it's not. So why is it that this simple and effective memory technique is so scarcely used in our society? The answer is simple: writing. Prior to the invention of writing, all knowledge had to be stored in the mind, which required any and all scholars to constantly use and train their minds. With the introduction of writing, scholars were able to record their knowledge, and in some ways it was beneficial. The mind is constantly making mistakes, forgetting, and rewriting everything that we know, and so by recording our knowledge, we can maintain the accuracy of the information and maintain its original state. However, as humankind began to record more and more of our knowledge onto papyrus and paper, we began to rely on our written information to store our knowledge. Eventually, the need to memorize everything became arbitrary, and writing eventually became a sort of external memory rather than a tool used for accuracy. Our external memories, the writings created to store information, then became books. And then books could be mass-produced. And now, all of the information in the world can be accessed within seconds at the touch of a screen. We no longer have any need or motivation to use our memories extensively, which has led to a long history of rote learning techniques at the forefront of our education system. I think we can all think back to a time when we had to memorize a list of vocabulary words, or a speech, or some historical dates and names. The process probably involved a lot of repetition, reading out loud, maybe even some of us wrote down all the information several times. This process was most definitely time-consuming and grueling, and regardless of whether it was for a class that you chose to be in, or a mandatory class, I can assure you that it was never fun. And that's what rote learning does to us. Though it can be useful for quick recall and foundational knowledge, it takes away a lot of the captivating and enriching aspects of learning. With mnemonics that require elaborative encoding, such as the memory palace, information is stored in an interesting and memorable way and tied to familiar location, which allows for a deeper connection to the information that we're storing, while also mitigating chances of blanking out. Elaborative encoding, with practice of course, also comes much quicker than rote learning. The world record for the most random words memorized in 5 minutes is 130. The same guy, Pratik Yadav, also set the world record for most historical dates memorized in 5 minutes. 143. At that rate, considering the fact that most of our vocabulary lists or historical dates and names don't go over 30 pieces of information, it would only take us approximately 1 minute and 9 seconds to memorize 30 vocabulary words, and approximately 1 minute and 3 seconds to memorize 30 historical dates. Now, I know those figures are a little out of reach, considering that most of us don't spend hundreds of hours a year training our memories, but take me as a more practical example. At the beginning of using the method of loci, it took me about half an hour to memorize a list of 25 vocabulary words, and I would still occasionally make a mistake or two. After a week, I began having a little more fun with the visuals of the new lists that I was memorizing each day, and the scenes kind of unraveled themselves as I read through the lists of words. By the end of the second week of just memorizing a new set of words each day, I was able to memorize 25 vocabulary words and their definitions without mistake in just 5 minutes. Not bad, huh? All of this is to say that we have been looking at learning the wrong way. As students, we have this opportunity to take in incredible amounts of information from all sorts of disciplines and explore them passionately. But a lot of that passion is taken away from rote learning, forcing us to go through the most grueling processes just to acquire the most foundational knowledge. It turns us off from diving deeper into our topics of interest, as we're convinced we'll only be met with more painful memorization. By simply using more effective, more interesting, and easier memory techniques, we can dedicate more of our time to being truly passionate about the information in front of us. And by cutting down the time of memorization, we can also dedicate more times to our non-academic endeavors, such as music, the arts, and sports. By simply changing our outlook on learning and adapting a few new tricks, we can completely change current students' notion of school and learning from reluctant to passionate. Now, let's try the memory palace technique one last time. Say you've got this big speech coming up, and you know what you want to talk about, but you just need a few key reminders of the main ideas to make sure you're not going off on any tangents. So, you make a memory palace for your speech. First, you see Danny Zuko from the movie Grease, and you start off with the story of when you were in Greece, and how that was the first time that you found memory to really be a nuisance. Next, you encounter Po from Kung Fu Panda wearing a toga, and you're prompted to introduce the memory palace technique, invented by the ancient Greeks, which allows people to memorize large quantities of information with great accuracy. Then, in your living room, you see the magic school bus, and you're reminded to tie all of this to our education system and how the memory palace technique can be used in subjects such as history and socials for memorizing historical dates and names. And finally, you see Billy Joel urging a fire in your sink, and you know to end your speech with how a revolution in our education system can lead to more passion in our lives, allowing us to fuel our fires. Thank you.